So we are back here talking James Harden. The Harden-Embiid era officially begins tonight for the Sixers when the Beard makes his debut against the Timberwolves. It's the first chance for the former MVP to get on the same page with the big man, maybe future MVP, in Joel Embiid, who's been close to unstoppable this season. Broussard, will success with the 76ers, do you think, define Harden's legacy? Will it?
Well, Jen, I feel obligated to say this first. Maybe I don't need to, but, obviously his legacy to some degree is set. Top 75 player, deservedly so. First ballot Hall of Famer, obviously. And I say this, Nick, James Harden, I'm not going back on this. He is one of the few players in league history to be all-time elite at scoring and at playmaking. Yes. And that, he is a phenomenal playmaker when he wants to be. And I put, LeBron, Oscar Robertson, Larry Bird. It's a short list that he joins for that.
Tiny Archibald.
But obviously all those
Get
guys
some Kansas City Kings
won
in there.
championship. Tiny Archibald, you could throw him in there as well.
Yeah.
Yes, for that one season, of course. But the question was, will his legacy be defined by this? And I'm going to have to say yes, by success with the Sixers. Yep. Because as great Charles Barkley, Patrick Ewing, John Stockton, Karl Malone, and a few others, Elgin Baylor. Yes, they are certainly recognized for being phenomenal individual players and some of the greatest we've ever seen. But when you talk about them, it is not long, and sometimes it's in the first sentence, that they never won a ring. A lot of times they're often mentioned as the greatest players to never win a ring. So if he doesn't have success in Philadelphia and win a championship, he will be another one of those great players that never won a ring. And I actually think, Nick, in a lot of ways, it will be worse for him than it was for those guys. Because, one, Harden's played with so many great players. And I get it. I think Dwight Howard still was in his prime in Houston early on. They didn't mesh. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, obviously they didn't get to play a lot together, but he's played with Durant. Obviously Chris Paul, and they were close, but they didn't get over the hump. And the second year when Durant got hurt, that was their opportunity, and they still didn't get it done with Harden. Obviously Russell Westbrook as well. And then you throw in Joel Embiid. Secondly, Harden, Nick, we've seen him fail time and time again, falter in the big moments. If you look at this graphic, in his last 8 elimination games, 1-7, and look at the stats. The field goal percentage way down. 3-point way down. Turnovers way up. We're talking about a 12 turnover game once. We're talking about a 2 for 10 or 2 for 11 game against San Antonio. Why are you only taking 10 or 11 shots? So that shows that a meltdown. And so there are those issues. And then 3, of course, he flat out quit on 2 teams, one of which had Kevin Durant. And Nick, if I get it, you're upset about Kyrie. But if you're really that guy, if you're as great as James Harden is, you should look across the room and see, okay, it's me and Kevin Durant. We still can win this thing. And so
100%.
Him quitting, that's going to hurt him.
So listen, a couple years ago, I said pre-pandemic, I thought James Harden was the best player to never win a ring in NBA history. You told me I was wrong. You were right, I was wrong. I was doing some projecting there. And not projecting like projecting myself, but some projection of, well, he's going to continue on, he's scoring 35 a game, he's, carrying teams at least deep into the playoffs. And instead, since then, he quit on the Rockets, failed with the Nets, and now he's on the Sixers. And one of the reasons, because his statistical resume does stack up relatively nicely against all those other guys. Here's the thing about those other guys who didn't win a ring. So Barkley didn't win a ring, but he was the best player on a finalist, and he lost to Jordan. Malone didn't win a ring, but he was the best player on 2 finalists and lost to Jordan. There's Patrick Ewing, you mentioned, didn't win a ring, but he was the best player on a finalist, lost to Hakeem Olajuwon. There's no real shame in that. Chris Paul hasn't won a ring. But since I made that statement, Chris Paul has been, in my opinion, the best player on a finalist and lost to Giannis. Harden has never been to the finals as the guy. He's been to one finals as a sixth man. So that has to me, there is no shame for Patrick Ewing. I don't think there's real shame in, listen, you lost in 7 to Dream. Like, it happens. You're not as good as Akeem Olajuwon. Neither is every other player that's ever played the game except for like 7 people. There's no shame in that. But to never even get there is tough. So the NBA did their 75 list. I've talked about this. One of the things I'm doing for the podcast that's coming out next month with Fox is I'm doing my 50 of the last 50 in order. So I've been spending a lot of time on ranking these guys. So right now, if Harden never plays again, I have him ahead of Kidd, Iverson, Russ, among others, but some contemporary names. But I think that's fair. That's where I've got it. With a ring, though, if he were to win it with Philly, I think he does go ahead of Chris Paul. I think there's an argument he goes ahead of David Robinson, Kevin Garnett, and I think you start stacking him and D. Wade, you at least start looking at it. I don't think one ring would put him ahead of D. Wade, but D. Wade never won an MVP, didn't have the individual success. But right now, as far as his legacy, he is one of the 32 greatest players in the history of the league, one of the 30 greatest clearly of the last 50 years. But there are guys of his era, forget LeBron, KD, and Steph, guys of his era like Chris Paul. D. Wade was his era to a degree. Dirk was his era to a degree. Kevin Garnett, you could argue, was kind of his era, who were flatly better than him. So do you agree with me that with a ring, he leapfrogs Chris Paul, maybe David Robinson, maybe Kevin Garnett, or is that a bridge too far?
I think there's a strong argument that he's already ahead of Chris Paul. Now, Chris Paul is tremendous. There's an argument either way. I mean, we don't have to get into that debate. But, yeah, I think there's an argument there. Harden, as you know, he was not only phenomenal in Houston, but they were a deep playoff team. Now, again, he faltered in some of the big moments. There are times he had big games as well. But I think you can certainly put him ahead of Chris Paul in a debate. I used to think, Nick, like you, that he was really on the cusp of passing Dwayne Wade. All right? But now I'm not so sure. Because one thing we take into consideration, in addition to your numbers and what you did on the court and your championships and all that, is the fortitude, right? The demeanor. I don't want to say heart, because I don't want to say Harden has no heart, but Dwayne Wade was like A+ in all those intangibles.
Yes.
Not only, I mean, we saw him as a young kid with Shaq when he led them to the finals championship over Dallas. And here's another intangible that he doesn't often get credit for. When LeBron joined his team, he recognized, as great as I am,
he sacrificed
he's the man.
His city.
Right.
Handed it over.
To win titles. To get 2 more rings.
Which is the opposite of what Harden's done. And real quick, though, we don't have to do a Harden CP3 thing, but we do have to say the deepest the Rockets ever got in the playoffs with Harden, the closest they ever got was when Chris Paul was there. And they could have beaten those Warriors. I thought they were going to. Chris Paul got hurt. Harden had 2 shots at it. Both games up 15 at one point. One of them a game 7 in his building, and they lost. So, I do think when we talk about Harden's Rockets tenure, we've got to recognize the best it ever was when Chris Paul was there alongside him, Jim.
Well, starting tonight, we will talk about his Philly tenure, see how he does alongside Joel Embiid. We'll talk more about this still to come. We got to get back to Aaron Rodgers now. The offseason drama is here. Will the back-to-back